Welcome back to What's New with Mead, and we are in, I think, episode 60 at this point. And I have my first time to chat with an Oklahoma Meadery here with me. I have Alex Long from Dancing Skeleton Meadery here to chat all about what it's like to own a meadery in Oklahoma and all about his interesting brews. I didn't tell you this, but I have one right in front of me, and so we'll talk about that here in a second. But welcome, Alex. Glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So this podcast is meant to be very just an opportunity for us to get to know you, and especially for me to get to know you. And this is our first conversation, so I am going to pick your mind about lots of things, and very curious to hear about your story. So tell us a little bit about Dancing Skeleton. Where did the name come from? How long have you guys been around? Let us know.
Okay, so Dancing Skeleton Meadery, we're based in Sapulpa, Oklahoma. Sapulpa is just outside of Tulsa. We've been on the market since September of 2020, right when COVID had everything shut down. Mm-hmm. So we're coming up on our 3-year anniversary. Dancing Skeletons meads, the primary focus of our meads are traditional meads. Mm-hmm. And so when you think of a mead, you can have a mead. For those of you not real familiar with making mead, you mix honey with water and then put yeast in it. Yeast turns the sugar to alcohol, and then you have this delicious thing called mead. Mm-hmm. With a traditional mead, you just use honey and water, and then yeast, and then age it in oak. There's different variations of mead. You can put different types of fruit in it, and when you're using fruit, the term that's used is a melomel, which could be a hybrid of a mead and a fruit wine, or you could make a mead and then add fruit to it to add some flavor to it later. If you add peppers to it, it's called a capsamel. If you use maple syrup, there's a term for it. If you use root vegetables, something else. Yeah. So you can use these different things to make new beverages. If you just use yeast or use honey, water, and yeast, it's a traditional. And traditionalist is what Dancing Skeleton specializes in. Each of our meads are made with a different type of honey, mm-hmm. and that affects the flavor of the mead. And you may ask yourself, well, how do you get different kinds of honey? Well, if you take a beehive and put it in the middle of, say, an orange grove, the primary flowers that those honeybees get access to is the blossoms on those orange trees. Now, if you move that hive to the middle of a blueberry farm, suddenly the flowers are different. The honey's going to be different. Mm-hmm. North America alone has over 300 different types of honey. And Dancing Skeleton is using honey varietals from all over the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah. So one thing, as I mentioned, I'd kind of before we started recording, I'd been looking for new mead, and you guys started shipping to Oklahoma City recently. It was kind of fun. And of course, as someone who makes a lot of mead, I'm here to try lots of stuff. And I tried, the first thing that I tried from you guys, I thought was very bold, was a buckwheat traditional. And I say bold because I think everybody listening, most of the people listening to this have pretty decent experience in mead making. And so they probably hear me say buckwheat traditional, and they're like, oh my gosh, that is wild, because that's strong. So that was my first experience into you guys, and it was good. And I'm not going to lie. At first, I was like, there's no way a buckwheat traditional. Like, it's just, it's such a bold flavor, and I've tried it before, and it's a acquired taste. But what I'm drinking now that I got in the store the other day is your Nostalgia. And I find this one, it's dry. Another bold take on mead making, because lots of times people don't make dry mead, and I think it's an under created product. But this one has tallow blossom honey. And I'd love to know, curiously, where on earth do you get tallow blossom honey?
So tallow trees are prolific along the Texas Gulf Coast. It is actually an invasive species in North America. So there's some people who are trying to squash them. Those people are not beekeepers, because tallow makes a beautiful honey, and the beekeepers love it. Mm-hmm. It makes a very fruity flavored mead. Even the dry mead still has some fruity characteristics to it. And it's kind of fun when I'm working a booth and people will come by and see my banner that says honey wine, and they'll say to themselves, "Oh, that's going to be sweet." And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"Are you sure about that?"
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
Go
so
ahead.
that's interesting because you say that, most people think honey and they think sweet. And I think that's such like I love that you guys have a dry traditional. And that's one of those things that I've been in my own repertoire wanting to have, because you're right. There are people who do not like sweet things. And, maybe that would save me some calories in my life if I didn't like sweet things. So, but having that dry option is such a great intro for those brewers. And so I want to ask you, because you're relying on yeast character heavily, and of course quality honey. Do you have like some go-to yeasts? Are you a Lalvin guy? Are you Red
So
Star?
I use exclusively wine yeasts. I
Hmm.
don't use ale yeasts right now. I've played around with them in the past before I made the decision to go commercial. And at the time, I was kind of a novice and I was just playing around, and I probably didn't didn't know what I was doing.
Mm.
And at the time, I was not happy with my results, and I
Yeah.
was really happy with the results I was getting with wine yeast. So I stick exclusively with wine yeast at this time. But what I will do is I don't have a go-to yeast. Instead, I will pair the yeast with the honey. So I
Okay.
will look at the flavor and aroma characteristics of the honey varietal that I'm using and look for a yeast that accents those particular flavors and aromas. And more importantly, what yeast has a temperature tolerance in the range that I'm currently fermenting it.
So I guess.
Because,
Oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry.
I'll actually, for each flavor of mead, I'll have two different yeasts. I'll have a winter yeast and a summer yeast. I'll
Oh.
choose a yeast that has a cooler tolerance that accents the characteristics of that honey, and I'll use it during the winter months. And in the summer months, I'll choose a yeast with a warmer tolerance that accents similar flavor and aroma characteristics. So that way I'm able to
Brew all year
produce
round.
yeah, produce a fairly consistent product regardless of the time of the year that I'm fermenting without having a $4,000 a year electric bill.
So I guess a better question would be: is there a yeast you've tried with a traditional that you have not that you have blacklisted, so to speak? Because I feel like I have in my head some experience with some traditionals, and I'm like, I'm never going to use that one again.
So yeast is my favorite aspect of making mead, my favorite aspect of making beer and wine. When I'm experimenting, well, I'll make a big batch and I will split that one batch among like 4 or 5 test batches, and each one will get a different yeast. That's my favorite thing to do. So I love yeast, and I can't say that there's a yeast that I dislike, because I think all yeast have something to offer. But one yeast that I do shy away from is 71B.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And the reason for that is 71B has a tendency to produce some off flavors if you don't rack it shortly after fermentation is complete.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to leave my mead in the fermenter for upwards of 3 to 4 months after
Okay.
fermentation is completely done, because stuff is still going on with flavors and mouthfeel and aromatics when you just leave it alone sitting on top of the yeast even after fermentation is done.
Mm-hmm.
And 71B doesn't necessarily lend itself to doing that. So I tend to not use that particular yeast very often. And not because I don't like the results it gives, but more so it doesn't fit with my particular method of mead making.
Yeah. Well, so I have if you enjoy yeast testing, I have a big video. I'll send it to you. It's coming out this Thursday, and I'll go and I tested one mead recipe versus 20 yeast, and I just kind of did a giant test with it, and it was a little. I back sweetened and I fermented them all in their median temperature range and gave them proper nutrients, and massive test. I mean, it took me a long time. But if you enjoy that kind of stuff, I think you'd enjoy that. What was funny to me about the test itself was, and people can go watch the video. But the top yeast was an ale yeast, and I did it blind. I had 20 tasters. They had no idea what they were tasting, and the top scoring was an ale yeast, and I was very shocked by that because I was like, man, this seems like I'm not going to go exclusively change to ale yeast for traditionals by any means, but I figured that there would be it'd be way lower on the totem pole. And funny enough, I think 71B was pretty low on the totem pole for that as well, like you're saying.
Yeah. I've had meads that I've absolutely loved that was made with an ale yeast. Some of the mead makers in my homebrew club, the Fellowship of Oklahoma Ale Makers, they use ale yeast, and it works beautifully. I only attempted to use it when I was quite a novice, and I've just been so busy trying other things that I haven't gone back to it.
That's fair. And well, you're at the commercial point too. Like the tipping point of where I'm at is I can make a batch and just kind of go crazy, and it doesn't affect anybody. The only thing is affects my wallet. And if I'm budgeting and, I'm not going to, I'll still be able to pay my mortgage. If you are experimenting, there's a little more on the line. If that 100-gallon batch you make does not produce a great product, you're going to be in trouble.
Absolutely. So that's something that I have to think about. And also something about Dancing Skeleton that is a little bit different than some of the other meaderies is who our customer base is. A lot of the meaderies are targeting the craft beverage crowd who are going around looking for flavor of the week. They come in, they want something new. If they don't see something new, they're going to turn around and leave. Whereas with Dancing Skeleton, we're more targeting the crowd that favors consistency. They come in, they try something, they like it, they come back, they're going to want it again. Mm-hmm. And it's a different crowd. It's a different thought process to market to those people. And those are more our customer base. So when we're looking at new flavors, it's really because a previous flavor is made with a honey varietal that's no longer available, not because we're scratching our head thinking, oh, it's time for something new.
Yeah. So I've tried, the tallow base. I've tried buckwheat. What are some other, I guess, what's your flagship product that you probably sell the most of at this point?
Our flagship product is made with wildflower honey. In fact, we call that flavor wildflower. And with honey, if a certain percentage of the pollen comes from one particular kind of flower, you can call it a monofloral honey.
Right.
So and I forget the percentage, but I think it's like 60%. If 60% comes from blueberry blossoms, you can call it blueberry blossom honey. Mm-hmm. And if 60% comes from clover, you can call it clover blossom honey. If it's just a random mixture of different flowers, wildflower is the catch-all. And wildflower honey, we use two different wildflowers, one coming out of Texas and one coming out of, I think, North Dakota or South Dakota. Oh, those are our strongest sellers. Close seconds, we've got about 3 flavors. One of them is made with blueberry blossom honey, one is made with raspberry blossom honey, and one is made with eucalyptus blossom honey. And the eucalyptus blossom honey surprises people because you hear the word eucalyptus, you think the aromas from the leaves that's put into skincare ointments. Well, we're not talking about the leaves. We're talking about nectar from the flowers on that plant, which is something entirely different. And eucalyptus blossom honey, when you make a traditional mead out of it, has some notes of marshmallow, buttery, and pine characteristic. And the honey itself, a lot of people are not very fond of. But when they try, when they try the mead that's fermented from it, it's like, wow, I was not expecting this.
I've tried eucalyptus too, and it's a lot of fun. And that is one of my favorite things is trying different honeys, because you're right, the process is interesting. The flavor profiles are wild. One thing that I find interesting about your meadery is I've talked to a lot of different meaderies in my time doing this podcast, and from what I've gathered after asking about honey, it seems like most people keep to the local sources around them. And as an Oklahoma mead maker myself, I have tried my best to find local apiaries who can give a massive amount of honey. Massive for me, 60 pounds, you know. So hearing you talk about going more out of state, the big thing I hear for people using local is that it is cheaper to get it to you. So I'm guessing you're probably doing a lot more shipping of honey to you rather than going out and, you know, get the trailer and go and picking yourself up, you know, a couple 100 pounds.
Yes. The local honeys that I use, I do have two of our flavors are made with local Oklahoma honeys. And the rest, I order it by the pallet. And I use honey in 5-gallon buckets, and I get a pallet of them, and there's 24 buckets that will fit on a pallet. So, yes, I am having it shipped in, and the shipping is enormous, especially the last 2 years.
Yeah, I've heard it's gotten worse too. It's not getting any better. So
yeah, eventually it'll stabilize because you have to think. The economy is going to be messed up after COVID because during COVID, you shut down the entire world economy and governments were propping up businesses, keeping them alive. And once that was over, prices had to increase. There was going to be supply shortages across every industry because manufacturing plants were shut down. Right. So this was going to happen after COVID. There's just no way it couldn't have. Things will stabilize. Shipping costs will come back down. Supply shortages will start to stabilize. And then after a while, some other thing will come along that will cause prices to go up again. Then after a while, it'll go back down again. So you just have to figure out that for the rest of your life, it's going to be a roller coaster. Things are going to be expensive. Things are going to be cheap. Then it's going to be expensive. And it's just going to be a cycle.
Right. Well, and I'm sure you were affected by this, but I feel like I heard something a while back about even like glass bottle shortages and things like that. And so I'm sure you've been fighting that too.
Yes. And I put mead into two different size bottles, 375 milliliter bottles and 750 milliliter bottles. There for a while, I could not get 375 milliliter bottles anywhere. And the 750 milliliter bottles, the supplier that I was using is based in Oklahoma City, and they were able to maintain inventory when I needed them. I don't know what sort of challenges they came up with or they came across to maintain that inventory, but every time I went to them, they had the size bottle that I needed. And then there's a couple of other size bottles that I was looking for that wasn't available. I was looking at 187 milliliter bottles to have more sample size, and those I couldn't find for a long time. And the products that I wanted that are currently in 375 milliliter bottles, I put those in a smaller bottle because it's more expensive to produce. So I put them in a smaller bottle to have them at a friendlier consumer price point. I wanted to put those in 500 milliliter bottles, but no supplier in North America has had those for the last 2 years. It is an approved fill size by the TTB, the Trade Tobacco, the agency the federal agency that regulates alcohol. They have fill sizes that is allowed for alcohol. You can't just go and buy some random size and put alcohol in it if it's not approved. Well, 500 milliliter is approved, but nobody currently carries that in a wine bottle. It's only available in like spirit bottles and like specialty bottles for like olive oil and that sort of thing. So a particular size that I really wanted to use, I just can't find the bottles for.
Yeah. So at your size meadery, what's the upper end of your batch size range? Are you, I guess, lower end, upper end?
So we are, I consider us a small batch meadery, and the batches that we're currently making are right around 50-gallon batches. And And we'll do, when we're doing an experimental batch, we may do like a 23 to 25 gallon batch, but we don't do any batches that's larger than that. We rather than having 4 or 5 very large tanks, we have about 15 55-gallon tanks that we do our batches in. So we have multiple small batches rather than a few large batches.
Interesting. That's I mean, I like that way of doing it too. As somebody who's interested in one day, being able to do more, it is a little daunting to think, oh, I have to buy this 200-gallon tank or something to be able to start. And starting smaller like that, and obviously still being successful, is very, very cool to watch. Do you notice any, I guess, in between? Are you like blending batches at the end product, or do you feel like the product you're getting from each specific container is the same?
So I'm doing a little blending, but only in small amounts. So I will do like a 45-gallon, I will ferment a 45-gallon batch with, say, blueberry blossom honey. Mm-hmm. The tank that's going to age in is a 60-gallon tank. So when I rack that 45 gallons into that tank, there's a little bit of headspace. So I will back sweeten with blueberry blossom honey, the same honey that I originally ferment with, but then there's a little bit of headspace left. So I will top that off with a batch that's made from a neutral honey, usually a honey blend. So it may have somewhere around 10% of a neutral honey and then 90% of the specific honey varietal.
Right.
And that way I'm able to maximize my costs as far as the aging tanks, fill them suckers up without having to have leftover product like, well, this didn't fit in the tank. What am I going to do with it?
Yeah. So you always have, like, I hear this with a lot of home mead makers too, is having a base just traditional for that reason, or for the reason of just, adding other flavors. That's a big thing that a lot of home mead makers do is make 10 gallons and then you split it out. And that's when you put your apples in one and your pear in another and your cherry, rather than start at the beginning with those flavors. And I've done a little bit of that in the past, but I tend to find myself doing more fruit additions in the beginning. Mm-hmm. I found varied results. Sometimes it's really works really well, and then sometimes you lose a lot of that flavor profile. Were you saying that you were doing most of your fruit in a secondary state, or if you do use fruit, are you going mostly in primary for things?
We don't use fruit at all. All of our flavors, except for one, are traditional. So the only thing that's different about each of our flavors is a different type of honey, as well as pairing a yeast to that particular honey. The one exception is, rather than water, we use that flavor. We use cold brew coffee.
Oh, okay.
So it's a coffee mead, and fermentation has. If you've ever done any fermentation, you'll see it. It looks like it's boiling, a lot of CO2 coming off, and that blasts off a lot of flavors and aromas. So that coffee mead, we use a fairly stout batch of cold brew coffee to maintain a rich coffee flavor once the fermentation is complete.
So you're fermenting on coffee then? I've
yes.
done some interesting. I've done some experimentation with coffee in the past, and I've done it in multiple facets, and I was not very successful. But it's one of those. As a YouTube mead maker, there's like keywords that people want. They want that recipe. Like they want to see a coffee mead. And then, somebody really wanted to see a s'mores mead. And someone really wanted to see like all of these kind of nostalgic flavors, so to speak, or just like bare bones coffee. I just want to be able to do this. There's also 1.5 million ways, from what I've heard, to be able to do a coffee mead. And it seems like nobody is in agreement of what the best way is. Everybody's got a good experience.
So if you ask 10 mead makers the best way to do something, you get 15 different answers.
It's true.
And the awesome thing is that they're all right. Mm-hmm. Everybody can do something different, and you can come up with something that's absolutely delicious.
Right. And that's the fun of this craft. It's also the frustration sometimes because I feel like people don't always believe your experience because they've had a different experience with that. They've had the opposite maybe. And the one time they tried putting coffee, fermenting coffee, it did not go well. And so then all of a sudden there's this idea that, well, that's just not the way to do it. And I find myself doing that sometimes too with certain things.
Yeah.
But the
With me,
experimentation.
it's really scary in that the prospect of not knowing how your effort is going to pay out for 7 to 12 months when you've
Yeah.
got a lot of money invested in honey. Honey is not cheap. And if you're getting some specialty honey, you may be forking out a whole lot of money to get a hold of it, and you don't know how it's going to turn out for until this time next year. That's a very scary prospect.
So are you aging your stuff do you have like a bare minimum where like, okay, I got to age this thing for at least 9, 10, 11 months, or how does that work for you, generally speaking?
It's based on the clarity of the product
Oh,
post back sweetening. I find that the practice that I'm doing with the yeast rehydration and yeast nutrient staggered nutrient additions, the meads are really tasty at around the 3 month mark, but they're pretty cloudy.
mm,
So it's a matter of aging them until they're nice and clear. Different honey varietals clear at different rates. For example, star thistle honey takes a very, very long time to clear because it's just, I don't know what it is that's in it, but it's also extremely foamy during the fermentation, and it'll be blowing out the airlocks and making a nasty mess if you don't use a blow off tube. Much more so than the other honey varietals. But the clarity of the product is what I'm looking for before I start looking at finding and filtering.
so okay, that's my question then. So you mentioned waiting for clarity. Is there again, I'm asking questions I don't know. When you clear something in a filtering manner, do you have to declare anything on a label? Or if you were to use Kisasol, chitosan, something like that it is a clearing agent itself, those are things you have to include on those labels, right? From what I understand.
My understanding is that things that are used that are part of standard that are a part of standard winemaking process, you don't necessarily have to include on the label.
Mm.
If you're doing something that varies from a standard process, then you that's very subjective based on the agent that is reviewing your formula submission. So if you're using Kesselsaw, chitosan for refining agents, those are standard winemaking ingredients. If you're using something different, like let's say an adjunct for flavor, like let's say hatch green chili peppers, would want to include that in your formula for somebody at the TPB to tell you whether or not that is approved at all, or whether it has to be declared on the label. The coffee mead, for example, I had to. My label that I originally submitted said honey wine with cold brew coffee. The with cold brew coffee was a 14 font size, and the honey wine was a 16 font size. They came back and told me that it all had to be a consistent font size. The with cold brew coffee couldn't be a notch smaller font size. That was an example where they did have an opinion about what goes on the label.
That's interesting. Well, so they want all those things to be equal parts, I guess, importance in that brew then with the label.
So really what it comes down to is they don't want that label to mislead consumers. If they look at that label and it says wine, you would expect that whatever whatever's in that bottle to be standard things that goes into a bottle of wine, whatever wine is. If you just have mead on that label, they would expect the standard things that go into a bottle of mead.
Yeah.
And if you vary that outside of whatever a standard thing is, then you've got to declare it on the label.
Interesting. That's all stuff. That's
things like sulfite and sorbate. Those are standard things that go into wine. Those are standard things that go into mead. Now you have to have with sulfites if you put sulfites in it, but you don't have to have with sorbate.
Yeah,
even if sorbate is in it.
That is, yeah. Okay, so I've always noticed that. I've always noticed people say with sulfites, whatever. But in my head, I guess I never thought about that. Like, are they using sorbate too? Because like that's the other half of stabilizing. You know, you're not generally just going to start throwing in sulfite and hoping to stabilize.
If there are fermentable sugars in it, it is either pasteurized or it has sorbate. If it's sweetened with a non-fermentable sweetener, like something artificial, or something like, I'm exceeding my limits of expertise with sweeteners, but if you like something like sweet as stevia or something that's natural but is sweet, that may not be fermentable, so you may not have to use sorbate. But if it is a fermentable sugar, you either have to use sorbate or you have to pasteurize. And if you pasteurization does burn off some of the flavors and aromatics in honey. I can't say anything about grapes, but in honey, pasteurization will destroy some of the flavors.
Right. So do you guys have, are you at the point where you have to have a honey box, or do you use your honey fast enough to where you're not worried about crystallizing? Or like some...
If it's crystallized, we warm it. We have these, they're heating wraps that wrap around a 5-gallon bucket that you plug in and slowly warm it up to a nice, comfortable temperature without getting it too hot and damaging the flavors. I think it's called a fermentation wrap. They're particularly used when you're brewing something like a Belgian-style beer and you want it to be fermenting warm, or if you're fermenting in a cold room and you need it to stay room temperature. But they work great for a bucket of honey. Putting one on a bucket will gently warm it. Putting two on a bucket for one that's crystallized rock hard will get it liquid in about a week or so.
Wow, interesting. Well, that's what I used when I did my big yeast test for, I basically sat all my carboys onto this big old mat, and most, I had multiple mats because I had to have different temperatures, but that's how I used to keep all these carboys at the right temperature, and it worked pretty well. Yeah, I have a 60-pound pail of coffee blossom honey I need to probably do that with, because it's obviously quality honey. It's also very crystallized. And I don't personally love dipping honey out of a bucket. It does not do me as much joy.
And when it's crystallized, I have destroyed many utensils trying to carve that stuff out of there. And I'm like, no, I don't do that anymore. When I pop a lid on a bucket of honey, if it's even partially crystallized, I'm done for the day. I will find something else to do and figure out a way to warm that sucker up. But I will find a way to warm it up gradually and never get it much above a temperature that the honey would naturally get at in the hive to begin with. If there's a natural, a wild beehive sitting out in the sun, or even, a commercial beehive, it can get up to 115, 120 degrees. So if you warm that bucket up to 115 degrees, it's not going to hurt the honey because it was already there to begin with. You just don't want to get it up above 125, 130 degrees. Then you might start to alter the honey, unless that's your intention, which is a different conversation. But yeah, if I see it even partially crystallized, I'm just done, and I start warming it up until it's liquid again.
Yeah. So have you done, maybe in your homebrew experience, because I know that the commercial side, Bochet's are generally kind of more funky, and you don't really do those because I know there's some weird laws and such around them. Have you done much with Bochet's in the past?
Only for personal consumption, not commercially. And the ones that I have made for personal consumption turned out really well.
Hmm.
or turned out modestly well. Some of the ones that I've had made by other people in my homebrew club were magnificent. They were really, really well done. So it can make an awesome, awesome beverage. I have a Bochet from a winery out of Texas. Um, in fact, they're one of my honey suppliers. They also are a winery.
Oh, interesting.
And I have not had a chance to open it yet because I'm hoping to share it with some of my friends in my homebrew club, and we just haven't been able to touch base it with yet. But yeah, Bochet's when they're well made are just heavenly.
Yeah. They're a lot of fun, and what I love about them is that obviously it all depends on how much you have bochet and or caramelized that honey and spent time with that. And so a while back I did a video that was like, I mean, it's not conclusive data, but it was, a 0 minute to 15 minute, 30, 45 hour 15, like five or six different bochet times. And I tasted it. And my little sweet spot I found was about 45 minutes is where we found that it was just enough altering of the sugar, caramelizing flavor before it turned into like a new, just a different kind of leaf. The ball rolled too far.
Right.
So I don't know. That's not true of every single situation or every honey because it's all so dependent on those things. But they are super fun to make.
Yeah, and it can also vary depending on if you're caramelizing the honey that you're fermenting with or caramelizing the honey that you're back sweetening with.
Mm-hmm.
That can be different results.
Right. So you said you did some home brewing a while back, and you're probably not doing as much because, again, commercial brewing takes up time. When you are building recipes, you're probably not, I'm assuming you're not starting at that 50-gallon scale. Do you normally do things in your meadery that are 1 gallon, 5 gallon as your test batches of things, or how does that work for you?
The intention is yes. I've got a list of experiments that I want to do that's like an ever-growing list that I don't get around to.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, the smallest batch that I do experimenting with, it will be like a 25-gallon batch. And it's not because a lack of desire to do more experimenting. It's just simply a matter of time. We're a fairly small operation, and so all of us that work for the meadery are doing multiple jobs at the same time. We all wear multiple hats, and a lot of the more experimentation that we'd like to do just kind of takes a back seat to just standard production.
Yeah, I mean, you got to fill bottles. You got to sell stuff to be able to do the fun stuff you want to do.
Yeah. But I have a list of I think it's about 25 specific experiments that I want to do that would probably be done on a 1 or a 3 gallon scale that I just haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah, that's I feel like the problem with most homebrewers, especially ones that are active on any sort of platform where you are watching other people make things. We all have our creative ideas, which, that's the fun part is you get to just kind of discover your own thing. But I can't tell you how many things I see that I'm like, now I got to go try that. It's on the list. It's like, here's number 89 now. And then like a day later, it's like, oh, I got number 90 here now. And so it's just ever growing. But I can imagine as a commercial side, that list just gets way longer before it gets any shorter because you do not want to spend money on something that is going to be so possibly not great.
Right. And going along with our business model of targeting consistency over new, there's only so much room to bring in something new. Because if we bring in something new, it's got to replace something else. And if we replace something else, we're taking somebody's favorite flavor away.
Yeah.
And so we have to be very judicious about what it is that we do. So if we do something new, it's often just kind of on the side in a small batch. We do new 5-gallon batches of things that we'll try and then go and share it with our friends and family in the local homebrew club. That we actually do, several times throughout the year.
Yeah. Well, and you have a really great homebrew club around there, the Fellowship of Oklahoma Mead Makers.
Fellowship Oklahoma Ale Makers. It's
Ale Makers, sorry.
um, uh, a homebrew club that has some fantastic brewers, fantastic mead makers, and just exceptionally nice people. Oklahoma City has a fantastic homebrew club, the Red Earth Brewers, and then there's the Stillwater homebrew club. I forget the exact name, but it's like Stillwater or something.
Yeah.
So there's and then there's the Broken Arrow Brew Buddies, and then I think Durant has a homebrew club that started recently. So there are a few homebrew clubs around the Oklahoma area that's going on, and the ones that I've met people from have, just amazing mead makers and people that are really thinking about flavor and experimenting and trying new things. And all of them are just such nice people. When you meet them and start talking to them, they're just great to be around, which is the best part about all of them.
Yeah, I feel like generally, well, sometimes there are, like, the mead making community can be really friendly. And there are points where, and I'm speaking from experience of seeing it happen on Facebook and seeing it happen on social media platforms, and sometimes it can be really volatile. But generally speaking, when you face to face with a mead maker, I've never had an interaction with a mead maker where I've been like, oh man, I don't like that guy,
And that's been my observation with social circles for any activities. The in-person groups are much, much more accepting and outgoing than the online ones. Mm-hmm. And I come from an IT background. I used to manage web servers, and technology was my bread and butter. And people online are meaner than if they're right in front of you.
Right.
It is what it is. So if anybody is interested in making mead and are a little nervous, about the prospect of buying, all this expensive honey and something that'll be sitting in containers for half a year or more without knowing if it's going to turn out good or not, go to one of the local homebrew clubs, and you'll probably be surprised at how accommodating the people are and willing to offer assistance to get you started.
Yeah. I love that I feel like I'm separating us out into different categories of mead makers, but there is like in person versus online. And, my YouTube channel, I tend to get a lot more online traction and a lot online comments, and those are always interesting. So you mentioned, I'm going to go back a little bit because I found this kind of fun. You are a small batch meadery, as you've declared and said. How big is your staff, generally speaking?
So there are 4 of us that are working every week, and then there's around 4 to 6 other people that help out on an as-needed basis.
Okay. So you have like essentially 4 full-time employees? Is that, or 3, I guess?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay, that's cool. And you said you're making about 50. Oh, I'm sorry, you have to repeat because you said a bunch of 55-gallon batches.
Yeah, one batch will be around 45 to 50 gallons, and we'll do like 15 batches at a time.
So you must have a big warehouse or some sort of facility you're in right now then.
So the facility isn't all that big. What we do is we kind of maximize our storage space. All our fermenters are on the floor and are on carts on wheels, so we can move them around, get them out of the way. When they're done fermenting, they rack to a container that's up on a shelf on a pallet rack. There, they may get pumped back and forth depending on what we need to do to transfer them to one tank or another. When they are completely done aging and they're as clear as we feel they're going to get, then we will filter them to a tank that's back on the floor on a rack with wheels. And when it's in that rack, when it's on a tank on the floor, then it's ready for bottling.
Okay.
So we play a lot of Tetris, moving stuff around on wheels and transferring stuff from one tank to another. And we're utilizing not only our floor space, but our vertical space as well.
That's cool. So, and that to me, my brain, I was visualizing as you're talking about all this. And then I'm thinking about all of my moments where I have just totally lost mead or done something silly. In all that time in moving things, have you had any real terrible losses of mead or any tragic moments like that?
Yes, I have. So I had two batches. One of them I was intending to make a dry champagne style mead,
Mm-hmm.
and one I was intending to back sweeten. When I went to go and back sweeten, I back sweetened the wrong batch. And
Oh
I
no.
back sweetened one that I intended to keep dry. And once you put honey in it, well,
Mm-hmm.
there's no going back.
Going back, yeah.
And so that kind of messed up that plan. And then a little earlier on, back when I first started, I was kind of when I first got my winery license. Then wine is mead is licensed as a wine for those of you who don't know. I was trying to see if I could industrialize my own practices before quitting my day job.
Mm-hmm.
I could make mead all day long, but I wanted to see if I could, the bottling and the labeling, make a consistent product that people would want to come back and buy a second time. Not just buy it, but buy it, like it, and come back and buy it again. And when I was back sweetening a mead, I kind of messed up and dumped a gallon of mead, or dumped a gallon of honey on the floor. And if you've never had to clean up a gallon of honey, it's a nasty mess. And while I was trying to clean it up, I was just really frustrated and I stepped in it. And stepping in a big puddle of honey, I used some very choice profanity that day.
I feel that. I have had that experience, not with honey specifically, but one time I was racking something and I precariously put it on top of something. I had the thought, I shouldn't be doing this. And then I walked away. And that thing came toppling over. It's a glass carboy that I had just back sweetened, a fair amount of too. And I lost 5 gallons of mead in my old brew space. And it was an absolute mess to clean up. And the best part is, it's on my channel. I have the whole moment documented because mostly with YouTube, I have to document everything I do. So I set up this camera. It almost looks staged. Like, that's how insane it is. The camera's low and you can see it. You just watch it fall. It looks like I intentionally made this happen, but it is not fun to clean any amount of mead in the first place. But back sweetened mead, that stuff is not good. Not fun.
Anybody who gets into making mead, making beer, making wine in any sort of quantity will continually find new ways of screwing up.
Yeah. It's a rite of passage, I feel like. You have to learn through those moments. You don't just you can hear about them, but until you do something yourself, you're probably not going to fully understand the woes of mopping up, a gallon of honey. Like, I can reflect on that experience for you and be like, man, that sucks, but I'll probably never know the choice words you said until I do it myself at this point. So, well, you're in Sapulpa.
Yes.
Right? Which is a wonderful place. I love Tulsa area, and I love that whole northeast part of Oklahoma. I don't get to go up enough, but I've been around some. And I love that you mentioned you're taking things to your local homebrew club as well.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you find when you are developing recipes, you're probably balancing your ideas off people, of course, your staff. Duh.
Yes.
But do you find yourself mostly going to that homebrew club with your recipes? Do you have like a friend group that you take things to generally and say, hey, I'm playing around with this. Like, what do you think?
So what I do is, if I have a new flavor, I will taste it and first of all see if I even like it. If I don't like it, it's done right there. Well, but on the label or on marketing materials, I have to put flavor descriptors. It has these flavors, it has these aromas, and everybody has different senses, different taste buds, different sensory systems in the nose. And so what I do is I will take some of the new mead and I'll take it to some of my friends at my homebrew club with a sheet of paper and some pencils in it. And I'll say, okay, what are you smelling? What are you tasting? and I'll have people start writing stuff down. And if multiple people are writing down the same things, that goes on the label. Well, it has notes of melon and citrus and peach and whatnot. Um, if three or four people are detecting melon, well, that particular flavor has some melon character to it.
Right.
So that's a lot of what I do with the flavor descriptors that go on the label. And also, on a similar note, see if other people even like it.
Right.
If I make something that I like and I start passing it around, and other people are like, what do you think? And I have to kind of prod them sometimes. Like early on, I was like, okay, I don't need you to smile and say you like this. I need you to tell me what you think about it. And after a little while, they started warming up to me and was like, okay, Alex, you say that this is going on, but you might want to rethink this.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, that gives me really useful feedback. And once I realized that I love honest feedback of all forms, then they started getting more comfortable being direct with me. You probably kept us on the oak too long, or it's a little too sweet or not sweet enough. And very, very helpful. And that takes a really strong bond with your friends to get honest feedback on something, because people don't like to criticize your work. That's hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
I think people have heard me say this a lot, but yeah, having those core friends, core group, whoever, to give honest feedback is more valuable than, it sounds bad, always give mead to your mom, your dad, your brother. That's important. They don't always give you the blunt feedback you need to run forward and say, like, hey, this is a apparent problem, or I'm not getting that flavor at all that you mentioned. Some people, people love us and they want to just support us. And some people will choose to do that through just saying, yeah, it's great. And you got to have the people to sit you down and say, hold on, you said this is cherry. This doesn't taste like cherry at all. So that's important there. You mentioned oak, and that was a little keyword for me, because at a smaller meadery size, I feel like there's lots of ways to go about oaking brews. And some people will do the full-on barrel. You invest the money in the barrel and you get all the use you can out of it. Is that where you guys are, or do you find yourself using more alternative methods?
What we do is we use oak cubes.
Oh, okay.
We don't do, but we have one barrel that's currently a bourbon barrel that we're aging a special release in. The bourbon barrel was provided to us by a Spolpa's Liquor Mart. And aside from that, we put oak cubes inside the tanks that we're aging in. Mm-hmm. The oak cubes provide the same result as the barrel, but with a fraction of the cost and none of the mess.
Yes.
Now you can do an oak barrel, you can do oak staves, you can do oak cubes, you can do oak chips. The staves are generally either for a 5-gallon batch or a 500-gallon batch. So we don't use those very often. The chips versus the cubes, the chips will impart the oak characteristic more quickly, but more harshly. Mm-hmm. The cubes, you get the oak characteristic that you want, but it's a more gentle addition. But what that means is with the oak cubes, it requires longer contact time.
Yeah.
So with oak cubes, you would be looking at, months of contact time. With oak chips, you might be looking at weeks of contact time.
Right. I generally go to chips because I'm quickly kind of rolling through things, and right. I find them more accessible right now. Like when I go to my local brew shop, it's very rare that I find oak cubes. And I don't know if it's just my local brew shop or what's going on there. I'm sure I could get online and buy them, and do the oak cube thing. A while back, I did a test that was seeing which one worked better for an orange blossom traditional. I did cubes and chips, and then a spiral. And I think at the end of that, if I remember, done a lot of videos, I believe the cubes were my favored result there. It did take a while longer though, and it's just the game of patience, you know. And I'm not always that patient. I probably should learn to be at this point.
It also depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to make something for the Christmas season, you do what you need to do to get a tasty beverage for Christmas.
Right.
Um, and if you're making more mead than you have the ability to drink, then you have the luxury of letting something sit in the tank longer. So using something that requires a little bit longer contact time. And for homebrewers, that means having a whole lot of carboys sitting around aging, taking up space that you may or may not have.
Right. That's where I'm at. It's like a lot of times I'm like, I need to go ahead and get this in a bottle because I'm trying to start a new project, or, you know, it's just been sitting for a while and it's just time. So stuff like that. But it is fun to see, and it's interesting to see a meadery using a different product. I feel like most people I've talked to say, well, yeah, we use barrels, and nobody really, I don't want to say the word admits, because I don't think it's a bad thing. I feel like most people glorify barrels in this manner that, like, the only way to get like a great oak character is like, or for people to feel like you've oaked it in a great manner, is to put it in a barrel. And I don't think that's always true. I hope that's not true, especially because I don't know that I'm ever really going to get there. Maybe eventually, but at this point, I'll never really have a truly oaked mead in their eyes then.
Yeah. But, you know, also a lot of people are really snobs about what they're doing. They think that the way they're doing is the purest way, and anybody else that doesn't do it their way is cheating.
Yeah.
And if you're making something, as long as you're making something that your customers or your friends and family enjoy, that's safe for them to consume,
yeah,
you know, there you go.
Yeah.
And if you're being upfront and honest, you know, if you're using corn sugar and claiming it to be honey, well, you know, you're not being honest with them.
Right.
You may make something that will fool them, and they may even like, but, you know, be honest with what you're doing, and try for some level of consistency. So if they buy it, when they come back and get it again, they know what they're getting, and make something that's shelf stable, that if they buy it and it sits in their, you know, in their cabinet for the next year and a half, and it's going to be okay. You know, if somebody else is doing something a little bit different, you know, that's okay. And that's why, you know, that's the great thing about having all these different wineries, breweries, meaderies, each one doing something a little bit different, to have a little bit of variety. If everybody's doing the same thing, we'd all just be drinking Budweiser every night. And, you know, I even like Budweiser, so I don't say that as criticism towards them. I just like, you know, today I may be in the mood for a glass of mead, tomorrow a glass of red wine, the next day a glass of Budweiser.
Yeah. Having those options. And I love that you mentioned in there, make a product that's safe for people too, because that is, I think on the commercial scale, much more obviously monitored. They are on it from what I've seen. Homebrew scale, there have been many times I have received a bottle from somebody that says it's been stabilized. Say it's cool. You know, you can just put it away, let it age for a little bit longer, and you know, I'll open it up and it is re-fermented, and I'm like, oh, okay, this could have been bad. You know, so that kind of safety measure, or just really following the rules, because I feel like there are rules that should be instituted for certain things in mead making.
Yeah. Wine bottles are not meant for storing any kind of pressure. So if you have a bottle of mead or wine that starts re-fermenting in the bottle, it will either subject to pop the cork or flat out shatter the bottle. And that's a flat out safety concern if it's shattering glass in somebody's cabinet.
Yeah, that's all. A lot of Facebook, when I peruse those, I see tons of situations where people have open their even their like fridge, and there's a blown up bottle. There's just some things in that, and that's a whole rabbit hole to go down. But just be safe if you are home. Everyone here listening to this is probably a home mead maker in some sort. Just be smart, be safe. Don't blow up any bottles because of not paying attention to what you're doing. So it's just important. So, Alex, I want to thank you for your time, and I want you to tell us, how can we support Dancing Skeleton Meadery? Can we get mead somehow? I know us Oklahoma people might have an easier time getting it. Do you ship?
We do ship. Our meads are available through Vino Shipper, which is available in 44 or 45 states. Every state that allows alcohol to be shipped can be ordered through Vino Shipper. Shipping is a little expensive when you're buying 1 or 2 bottles. If you're buying 4 or more bottles, the price per bottle starts to come down, but then you're buying multiple bottles of mead. Right now, we are in, as of this last week, 64 stores in Oklahoma. Primarily in the Tulsa area and Oklahoma City area. Mm-hmm. We are also in Stillwater, Bartlesville, Tahlequah, McAllister, some of the outlying areas. All of those are listed on our website. And we're shooting to get in 75 stores by the end of August and 100 stores by the end of 2023.
All right.
Well, so, and if you have a favorite store that doesn't currently carry us, ask them to reach out to us, and we will make every effort to get over, let them sample it, and see if they're really interested in putting it on the shelf. We try our best to accommodate anybody who reaches out and says, hey, we want to carry your product. We do only currently market towards liquor stores and not grocery stores. That is our attempt to support that particular market, the liquor stores. You'll only find us in either our tasting room, in a brewery, a restaurant, or a liquor store.
Yeah, I love that too, though. I think that is important, and that's a whole other topic of supporting smaller businesses and liquor stores and all those things. So I love that. I'm going to be putting all of the information I can find about you guys, your website, and ways to support you guys down in the description of this video, or if you're listening to the podcast version, it will be in the description of the podcast, so you'll have to click down a little bit. But I highly suggest, especially because I've experienced their mead and I've tried it, you should go and support Dancing Skeleton Meadery and just try to be proactive about supporting more mead makers, especially ones that are making good mead. And you guys are doing a fantastic job. I am super excited to hopefully get up there and experience your tasting room. I think that's cool, and I just haven't had that here in Oklahoma. So I look forward to meeting you in person and getting to try some of that mead fresh off tap.
Thank you so much.
So
thanks for having me here tonight.
Yeah, go check out Dancing Skeleton Meadery. Thank you, Alex, and I'll catch you later.
Thank you.
Cheers.